And welcome back. So get this, it appears Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi set a record Wednesday night, the longest speech on the House floor. She spoke for more than 8 hours, demanding an immigration commitment from House Speaker Paul Ryan. Here's a clip.
Why should we in the House be treated in such a humiliating way when the Republican Senate leader has given that opportunity in a bipartisan way to his membership? What's wrong? There's something wrong with this picture, and that is why this morning we took a measure of our caucus on support for the package. Well, we have to see all the particulars of it yet, but there are good things in it that it does nothing to even advance, even with a commitment, without having passed the legislation first, to advance bipartisan legislation to protect dreamers in this House. Without that commitment from Speaker Ryan, comparable to the commitment from Leader McConnell, this package does not have my support, nor does it have the support of a large number of members of our caucus.
We want to bring in Molly Hooper now. She's a CBSN political contributor and Capitol reporter for The Hill. As you see, she joins us now from Washington. Molly, great to chat with you. You were actually live tweeting Pelosi's remarks, so good on you for staying with it for those 8 hours.
Thank you. Pat myself on the back there.
Indeed. And one of the tweets you sent out was quoting Nancy Pelosi saying, "Do I have time to go on and on?" For the most part, though, she was reading from letters she had received, telling the stories of these dreamers, these children of undocumented immigrants. But what stood out to you the most?
Well, what stood out to me the most was that she was standing for 8 hours on 4-inch heels and that might sound sort of silly to some out there, but I mean, Nancy Pelosi was like a rock. When you go over to the Senate and they like to use this tool called a filibuster to claim floor time and prevent others from speaking and whatnot, you know, you'll see senators waving their arms back and forth and reading stories from books and, you know, just basically stalling time. But Nancy Pelosi really, she stood pretty firmly in one spot and she spoke clearly, succinctly. Even though she was telling these stories, she would turn to her colleagues and address them as well. And really, she was just able to keep going and going and going. And so by the time you hit, you know, the 6-hour mark, it sort of seemed like, oh, there's Nancy Pelosi. And really, that's a difficult thing to do, to speak for 8 hours straight. And she did. And you could see her aides, her staffers coming with these testimonials from various DACA recipients who've submitted their personal stories to members of Congress. And Nancy Pelosi would read those stories and point to the member of Congress. At one point, Dick Durbin, the number 2 in the Senate, was down on the House floor, and she was reading a testimonial from one of his constituents. And they were sort of sharing inside conversations, but it was fascinating to watch.
And I guess on one hand, you know, critics could call it political theater, but Nancy Pelosi is trying to get something tangible out of this. She's trying to get the same assurance from Speaker Ryan that Senate Leader Mitch McConnell gave to Democrats in the Senate, which is that they will bring up for a vote some legislation that can deal with dreamers and DACA recipients. Where do immigration talks stand at this point? And is Nancy Pelosi's 8-hour-plus performance likely to help or hinder the progress of those talks?
Well, there's the rub, because what Nancy Pelosi really wants is she wants to have the same process that the Senate was guaranteed by Mitch McConnell, which is an open process. See, unlike the Senate, the House has very strict rules, which is why it's unusual for you to see a House member, you know, speak for, I guess I shouldn't say perform, but speak for 8 hours straight. There's no such thing as a filibuster in the House. Only 3 people in the House, the Speaker, the Leader, the Majority Leader, and the Minority Leader, have this so-called magic minute where they can speak for unlimited periods of time. And that's so you very rarely do you see that. And the same thing is true when it comes to debating legislation. So what Nancy Pelosi wants is for the House to discuss an immigration bill, you know, something to tackle that DACA recipients, you know, protections to protect DACA recipients, but she wants to do so in a way that allows members of the House to offer their own amendments, like they do in the Senate. Mitch McConnell has said said that he will have an open amendment process in the Senate where senators can offer amendments, and if that amendment gets 60 votes, then, you know, it's accepted. If it doesn't, well, then they move on. The House, however, is not like that. There's a Rules Committee that gets to decide which amendments will be debated on the House floor. And Nancy Pelosi doesn't like that at all. And so what she's calling for is an open process on the floor. Now, Paul Ryan and the Republicans are seeming to pick up, you know, he's seeming to get more support for a bill offered by, an immigration-related bill offered by Bob Goodlatte, who's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, a Republican. It's a conservative bill, and it falls more along the lines of President Trump's plan. But again, even if the House took that up, it likely would be governed by very strict rules, and you wouldn't see members allowed to offer these amendments on the House floor like Nancy Pelosi is calling for.
Now, the other topic I want to ask you about is parades. At the White House press briefing Wednesday, Defense Secretary Mattis said he was putting together some options for President Trump regarding a military parade that reportedly the president wants. In response, Senate Democrats sent a letter questioning the cost of such an event. What are folks on Capitol Hill saying about this? Is there really an appetite for this kind of thing?
I think that members on the Hill are a little bit more concerned with actually funding the military. Right now, today, the senators, the key, Democratic and Republican senators were able to strike a deal when it comes to funding the military for the next 2 years. But if you listen to what members are saying, senators and Republicans alike, the cost of a military parade seems a bit much, especially when various branches of the military are having problems with training exercises. They don't have enough aircraft to stay up in the sky. It's not something a lot of members would like to see based on what I've heard. President Trump is thinking of this grand military parade as he saw, in France, in Paris, but trying to get enough tanks to come back to the United States and roll them down Pennsylvania Avenue is probably a stretch at this point, but Mattis was very diplomatic in saying that, the president has great affection for the military and he just wants to show that, but I think it would be pretty unlikely to see that happen involving so many tanks and bits of our arsenal, I'll say.
I think you're right on that point. Molly Hooper, I'll take your word for it. Standing in heels, 4-inch heels for 8 hours is nothing to turn your nose up to.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.